to this. If you've lost a pet and you're struggling, you need to watch this interview. Hi, everyone. I'm Hindi from Greypawsandall, and today I'm really excited to be speaking to Gemma Ridge, who is a qualified bereavement, loss, and trauma therapist who specializes in pet bereavement. And she will give you a quick background about herself, but I thought it was really important to speak to a therapist who actually specializes in pet bereavement, so she knows what she's talking about, and you will be able to relate. So welcome, Gemma. I'm so excited for this chat.
Oh, hi, Hindi. Thank you. I really appreciate that introduction, and I was super excited when you contacted me. So yeah, my name is Gemma. I'm just what Hindi said, qualified counselling psychotherapist. I am in the UK, if you hadn't already guessed that. I have been qualified as a therapist for over 10 years now, and I've seen many people, adults usually over 18, for various different issues, challenges, problems, things that they kind of want to work on, bereavement, grief. But about, I guess, 5 or 6 years ago, I decided that I wanted to specialize in pet bereavement because I really struggled with my own experience of anticipatory grief. And that was when my soul dog was Bruce. He was a Kerry Blue Terrier. I had him from being a puppy. He was there throughout my entire life. He was there through some serious ups and downs. And I've always loved dogs, Cindy. We've had, dogs all our lives and when I was a child, but there was just something about this bond that we had. And about 2 years before he did pass, I started to become incredibly anxious, like super anxious, really sad all the time, didn't really fully understand it, didn't really know what to do with it. And I thought, well, I'm a therapist. I should be able to deal with this. I should be able to deal with this. I thought, well, I can't really go and speak to somebody about this because I just don't think they'll understand. I didn't really understand either. I spoke to a couple of friends and they were really good, really well intended, but they were like, just focus on the now. Why are you worrying about something that's hopefully going to happen in a few years' time? And I was like, you're right, but I just don't know. I just don't know how to do that. So after a while, and that got worse, I just thought I need to speak to somebody. And I thought about some of the therapists I've seen in the past, and actually, I just didn't think they were going to get it. One in particular, when I did try, kind of wanted to like explore something else, and I was like, it may be that it's linked to this, but that's not really why I'm here. So I thought, well, you don't understand. And then one day I was just feeling really, really lost. And I looked on the internet and I found this website of this therapist. And I just instantly just felt so good because she was qualified, similar to myself. And she had a page about pet bereavement. And there was a poem on there that she'd written. And I just sobbed as soon as I read it because I could really relate to it. And in that moment, I thought, you are the person I need to speak to. So I spoke to her and we did some really good work together. And then I just was like, this is what I need to do. I need to, combine my skills and experience as a trauma and then start to specialize in bereavement therapy anyway, and my love of animals and I just thought I know I'm not the only person who feels like that. So that's when I started doing some more research, and I could have just gone into it like that, but I felt it was really important. So I did some more additional training and some qualifications, and that's really my journey, really, and I'm really passionate about this, as I know you are, Hindi. Um, I want to shout about, you know, the stigma that surrounds this area, and I think, my experience and qualifications in trauma can be really, really helpful with some clients, not all, but that can be really, really helpful. So that's a bit of a long introduction as to
No,
why,
it's
but I
perfect.
feel like it's really important to me because as a, the general rule of therapy is you very much, keep yourself out of, it's the client's work. And, and I agree with that. I do disclose sometimes when I feel like it's appropriate to my client, but in the reason why I've chosen to speak about this more vocally is I think that if somebody who is a therapist is admitting their vulnerabilities around, like, I didn't know what to do with this, and I couldn't find a place to go, and where I did was mixed reviews, then that may help other people a bit like it helped me when I read that poem on that website. Because as soon as I read that, almost like the relief came straight away. There was still a lot of work to do, but the relief came straight away.
I know this is going to be really helpful because only people who have been through it can understand what people are saying, and nobody wants to hear it was just a dog. So thank you so much
No,
for agreeing to have this conversation. So I'm going to start. I have
you're
a
welcome.
lot of questions.
Okay.
So my first question, from your experience, what do people
Mhm.
often misunderstand about grieving a pet compared to grieving a human?
I think just kind of following on from, I suppose, my personal like example there and experience is that people often don't understand the enormity of or how much losing a pet can really affect a person. There's this term which probably a lot of people, like, I think, in your group probably have heard, which is disenfranchised
Yeah.
grief. And that describes any type of grief or any type of loss that is often acknowledged to a point, but not in the same way. So, obviously here we're talking about pet loss, but it could be the end of a relationship or a job or a marriage. So there'll be some acknowledgement of that, but not in the same way as, you lose but there's the loss of, a parent or a child. Now, I'm not here to say that, I'm not ever going to get into a debate with people about like whether that's right or wrong. If the majority of people think, well, it's crazy what you're saying, of course, it affected me more when I lost this, I don't know, my dad, or that's your experience. But we have to understand that that's not everybody's experience. It's not everybody's experience. And so, some people's experience is that for them, the loss of a pet can be just as difficult and in some cases more so. And I'm always a little bit shocked when like the client comes and they're absolutely devastated and understandably, and then they tell me about their connection with their dog, and then they'll go, and I just don't understand why I feel this way. And so I'm like, okay, can I just reflect back what I think I've heard today? And I will do it in that way, which is, so you're telling me this, and this. And they're like, oh, it sounds like, your dog was, you know, the most, important thing in your life. It gave you connection, routine, responsibility. It doesn't mean that you didn't love your mom, but maybe there were some complications there. They followed you around everywhere. They were, the reason why you started going outside on walks again when you were struggling with your like mental health. It's the reason why you socialized, all of these reasons, and now they're gone, and it feels strange that you like, you feel the way that you do. And then often they'll have that like moment of like, oh yeah, of course. Of course. So society kind of compounds this. I mean, if
Absolutely.
you're lucky, if you work somewhere, I mean, I have heard that some employers do like now acknowledge, they will have some kind of compassionate leave
Mhm.
but I think that's rare. I think that's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, I would think so too. Because it's not,
Mm.
it just seems weird in society that you could be that upset over losing a pet. People are embarrassed or
Yeah,
uncomfortable to really come forward and say it, which is why, this kind of conversation or support groups or any kind of group where people who get it are there. First of all, you start to
100%.
understand it's normal. And I'm probably, oh, see, that's my next question. So I'm not going to say too much.
No,
It's normal. And they feel like they have a place to go where people who understand. And that's all we want.
you need to have a place because in my experience, my own personal experience, and this will come out in this interview, but also with clients, and I'm sure you've experienced yourself, Hindi, is that it will only add further complications and potentially other emotions and challenges with potentially your mental health if you feel like there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
You can have a part of you. I often talk as a therapist is let's just talk as in parts rather than the whole. You know, there may be a part of you that completely, if somebody said to you it was just a jog and that you absolutely feel crushed by that, you feel understandably, rightly so, that's not true. But those messages do filter in. They do filter in. So even if the part of you knows that's not true and you actually want to argue with that person about why that is the case, there may also be another part of you that has been affected by those messages over years, which is thinking, well, what is wrong with me? Like, why do I feel like that? Why do I feel the way that I do? And might start searching for something. You know, am I odd that this is the case? Because if I'm the exception, and they're the majority, then they must be right. That's how our brains work. It looks for patterns. So if you're then like, oh, okay. And what do you do with that if you don't have your community? It just festers.
So the next question is kind of, well, it's an extension of what we're just saying now, is
Mm,
I was going to say, like many people wonder if what they're feeling is normal after losing a pet.
mm,
And what do you most want people to know about the range of emotions they might experience?
absolutely. Just like following on from, I guess it feels like these questions are really good, Hindi, because
Yeah,
they
thank
kind
you.
of flow, don't they?
We'll
They're
see
really
about the
good.
next
Like,
one.
oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's really good. You know, you know, first of all, like, whatever you feel, whatever you feel. I mean, there's all the theories, of, you're going to go through shock, denial, you're going to feel guilt, which I'm not going to speak too much about guilt because we'll speak about that
No,
in
because that's
in
the
in,
next
in a
question.
bit. But you're going to feel really sad, you may be full of remorse, anything. The only reason that we think and the emotion is like we start questioning it is because we start attaching meaning to it. You know, it's that, again, it's those messages, it's those internal messages that have come from external
Yes.
messages, which is, I feel sad. Okay, that makes sense. Oh, but I can't feel that sad. Why? Because this is doesn't make sense. I lost my, somebody may say, "Oh, I feel really, really sad, and I lost my uncle like 3 weeks before, and I was sad about that, but I wasn't as sad." So, you know, we just start attaching kind of meaning to it. And what I would say is, and I'm going to put this out here because I think again it's really important. There may be a part of you, again, I'm going to keep using those parts, that also may feel some sense of relief
Okay, that's the next
as
question is
well.
guilt. So,
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we won't, that, yeah. So I will just say that does not mean, but that you didn't love or you're glad. It's complicated. So whatever you feel. And what I would say is it's only when we start kind of questioning it and thinking, okay, that's not right.
so this the next question
Yes,
is
sorry, Hinny. Yeah, yeah, I'll go.
how common is guilt or second guessing after a pet passes, especially around end of life decisions? And it's exactly like, running on from what you just said, because even I know from my own experience,
Mhm.
um, I- obviously I was never glad, but I know that sometimes you can feel a certain sense of relief, not only because of how much like caregiver burnout, which I think is probably a question I'm getting to later, not only because of that, but because of worrying about how our dog or cat or whoever was coping, like were they suffering and did we wait too long, and all those second guesses. And maybe it's like, thank goodness now they're at peace, which is not a bad thing to feel, because at the end of the day we never want our animals to suffer, and we always want to do what's best. And I have been there once with second guessing, like, I don't know if there's another question about that, but
That's okay.
like, did I wait too long? Should I have done it sooner? Should I have done it, next week? And so
Mm,
many really strong emotions. And I know I see that a lot with some of the group members in my
okay.
Facebook group. It's that guilt, and that is something that is so hard to let go of, and you go down a hole that's very
Mm,
hard to climb out of. And it's almost, I don't want to say it's like, maybe it is a little worse than just like the grief that you would feel, because guilt.
I think it can be worse than the grief because grief is, I guess, is active. It helps us. You know, okay, let me start it. We like to make sense. Our brains like to make sense. They pattern match, you know? So if I can't make sense of what's happened, my brain doesn't know what to do with that.
Mm.
So it's going to look for answers. And the reason we like that is that it gives us a sense of control. We don't like uncertainty.
No, we
Uncertainty is
don't.
hard, and uncertainty leads us to things being ambiguous. We can't answer that. And so, whilst our brain is still active in the guilt, looking for or thinking about, should I have, got a second opinion or a third opinion? Did I act too quickly? Did I act too slow? I feel guilty because I went on vacation 3 weeks before when,
No.
all of these things, whilst we're in that process, that guilt is active. Whereas grieving, once we enter that, it's raw. It makes us, it can leave us with all those horrible helpless feelings, whereas guilt keeps us in it. You
Yes.
know, my it's interesting because I I recently wrote a blog on this because I was thinking about guilt what compared to when I'm working with a client who it's experienced like a human loss and they're grieving. You know, guilt always shows up, you know, and guilt's not a
Mm.
bad emotion. You know, guilt isn't a bad emotion. Guilt is our moral compass, isn't it? But I feel, and this is just from my experience, so I'm not saying it's right, but from my experience, that I notice guilt is heavier when I'm working with clients with pet bereavement. And I think the reason for that is because we are so responsible for our pets. We're so responsible for our dogs and the decisions right from the beginning. You know, how many walks they have, when to feed them. It's such a beautiful connection that we have. And at the end, that is our final decision around responsibility. You know, and I know there's people have different views about like when you will know the time.
Yeah.
Like, you know, sometimes we don't always we
No.
miss that, and that's because not always because we don't want to see it, it's because our brain is already grieving and our memories and things can be distorted in those moments. So we can't ask them. You know, we can't say, is this the right time? It's in my view, it's the greatest gift, but it's a heavy
Yes.
one.
Yes.
It's a heavy one. So guilt, I think, is heavier in that way, but it makes sense to me because it's active. And
Interesting.
if I can't problem solve it and I can't blame anybody, I have to blame myself,
I
you
often
know.
see people talk about guilt after the fact because then they learned some new information or
Yeah.
they're feeling guilty about something that happened, let's say years before with another dog or another cat or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and they feel guilty. And I always say, whether this helps or not, but I truly
Yeah,
believe
I'm
it,
sure it does.
you can't judge based on information. And I've done the same thing, but I know it's not healthy because you can't judge based on information you did not have at the time. You're judging that based on all the new experiences you've had since then
Yeah.
because I've gone down a hole with one of my dogs that I believe
Okay.
was murdered by her
Mm.
vet. That's another story. I wrote an article about it, but I was also like, how did I not see that? How did I know the vet wasn't good? Yeah, but how many more years of experience have I had
Yeah.
since then? So I'm judging it based on I didn't know, but you can still beat yourself up about it even when you're
Yeah.
trying to be logical about it.
It's what we call hindsight
Yeah, of
bias.
course. Hindsight's
We
2020.
yeah, absolutely. We it's really important, I think, to I think what can be really helpful is to like now, like I know that, like is to learn. It doesn't help in the moment. If like now when I look back, I think, okay, I don't think my vet murdered my dog, but the
No, this case it
decision
was
on the
incompetence.
day,
No, this was
yeah, this
incompetence.
yeah,
So that was,
but the decision, I have regret and remorse about the vet that we saw on the day when we had to let Bruce go. And I feel guilt, I felt guilty about that. But, I'd never seen that vet before, and there was all this like I should have researched, I should have known, I should have
yeah.
asked for that decision. How could I have known that at that time? Like we
Right.
couldn't. And not only that, you know, you're frantic. You're not in the
Yeah.
best place. And this is what I also say to people as well, is that we we have to remind ourselves eventually when we get to a place, which I know we're going to talk about compassion later, is that we made the best decision we could at the time
I say that all
based
the
on the
time.
information that we had and also the resources and how we were feeling at that time.
Yeah.
You know, your emotional brain will shut down your rational brain. So when there's distance from it, you know, and you're sat with me and you're going, oh, but I could have done this, and I'm like, you can only know that now because you have more information
That's right.
when there is distance from it. And because although in here you're talking about it and it's hard, your rational brain is also still online. But in that moment, you may have had to make a really quick decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So let's talk of the moment you come home. And just saying that, I can literally feel like what it's like when you walk in the door, even if you have other dogs in the house or whoever. I know I still feel that. So, some people say, well, one of the hardest moments is that when you come home. And for me, I always feel like it's shock. I
Mhm.
think my body goes into shock because you walk in the door and their bed is still there. I still actually have, okay, we moved recently, but until we moved,
Mhm.
I had one of my heart dog's leash hanging in the exact same spot, and she passed away years ago. I couldn't take it down, and I
Mhm.
couldn't take her pill schedule off the cupboard.
Mhm.
But that's okay because I know I'm okay. But I couldn't do that. But it's that initial shock when you walk in the door. And I know the last time, no, not the time before, when my heart dog died, I still came home to Jack. And she was such a little tiny 10-pound thing, but it's such something big is missing. So it's not oh, well, it's not a totally empty house, but you feel that. So let me see, what do I want to ask you? So what's happening psychologically in those moments and is there anything people can tell themselves in that moment to feel less overwhelmed, or is it one of those, you have to feel the feelings?
I think you described it really, really well, Hindi, there, that it is, you are in shock. Even if, let's just say you've been to the vets and, you know, your dog was, or your animal is euthanized there and it's the first time, or even if that happened at home or your pet dies naturally at home and then you go out and then you come back that first time, we know that our brain is not able to make sense of that. It's kind of like part of you again. It's this part. I know that they've gone, but that it's not fully registered. It's a bit like that dream state, like when you wake up, you're like,
Right.
oh, is it real? And I think I kind of covered this a little bit earlier, which is that our brain, like the grieving brain, well, it's not just the grieving brain, the brain, this wonderful thing that we have, it has to make sense of everything really, really quickly. So it does that by gathering information and then looking for patterns. So the first time you go into that house, that pattern
Right.
is different.
Where's the dog? They
Yeah.
usually gets up when they hear me.
Absolutely. Look and think about all that, like, the for me, like the leash or the lead, depending on where you are, is at the door. And like Bruce would be, or my dog would be, his nose would literally be just coming out of the door. He would greet me, his tail would be wagging. I would see his his balls, I would see his toys, I would see his, like, all of those things that have been there for years have established very strong networks in
Mm.
my brain. And so when you go in, your brain isn't ready yet. It's looking. It's trying to make
Oh, interesting.
sense. It's
Right.
trying to make sense and it can't make sense. So then it's shock. And that continues for a long time. So it it's almost like I kind of like, I'm quite a visual person. I always kind of like draw this with clients. I'm like, imagine this is like network in your brain and it's like a really big muscle because it's over years and years, it's just been pumping because of the same pattern. Now it doesn't know what to do.
Right.
It's it, it doesn't know what to do. So it's trying to make sense. And the more it tries to make sense, the more that is feeding this has changed. And that's when it will activate other parts of your brain, where it will activate your emotions. And it's so extreme because that pattern not only has changed, it's changed in the most drastic way. So you are in shock. It's overwhelming. So in terms of, is there anything you can do? I don't think there's anything you can do to fully prepare yourself for
No.
that. But if just knowing this, that this makes sense, it's like, so I think the worst thing we can do is think there is something wrong with us.
Yeah.
For whereas if that helps, that explanation, like, oh, of course, it's pattern matching, it's science, it doesn't know what to do, is if you can, if you have the opportunity just to take a couple of minutes before you go into your house, take some deep breaths. We don't always have this. And just like, and tell yourself or put your hand on your heart, this is going to be really hard because this is the first time like going through this door that it really solidifies that this is this is different and it's gonna hurt. And I, as a therapist, whoever I'm trying to support or help, I would say if you can prepare yourself that it will hurt and to lean into that, but also give yourself permission to distract yourself. We don't want to. Okay, I'll just roll back a little bit. There's this message which is, you know, don't shut off your emotions because it will, or ignore it or get rid of everything because it will bite you in the bum later on, and that is true. But the alternative, which is the other end of the extreme, which I'm reading a lot about now, is lean in and feel everything and and that is important, but it's going to flood you, it's going to overwhelm you.
Right.
So what I say is we need to find a balance. So I would be recommending or suggesting go in, spend 5 minutes, just sob, do whatever you need to do, and it's okay then if you know need to watch the TV or do something because that is the best way. But there isn't like one thing you can do to make that like less painful because it will and it should be. We I just think it's more about the approach. If we kind of like know that that's kind of coming, but we can do it in a way that feels a bit safer,
Could
if that
you
makes
go?
sense.
That's a good point, is like to prepare yourself to and understand that that will happen. But what about when you say like 5 minutes and turn on the TV? Could you walk in the door and, it's like desensitization when you're doing that with a dog who's
Mm,
like maybe
hmm
afraid of something. Could you do the same thing for yourself? Like open the door and then close the door and come back
Yeah.
later, or, then walk in. I don't know, I just,
I, I, um, one of the approaches that I really, really like, again, not everybody agrees, but is to think about. So I could think about it like a scale. So if you think about a scale of 0 to 10, and 10 is like the most extreme, and 0 is I'm not going to do anything at all. I know myself, so I know that I'm somebody who feels really, really, really strongly. And if I was the likelihood would be that if my if my dog now, if I lost my dog now, the first time I go into the house, I'm going to be an absolute bit. So I'm going to be more at that 10. Like my aim isn't to be at a 0, but I know that if I'm there too much, that would be, exhausting. It could potentially lead into other things where you feel, mental health may really, really suffer. So I'm going to go in that house for maybe 10 minutes and then come out. Or I'm going to go in with a friend,
right,
or I suppose we call it like titrating. If you want to, or if you feel like, well, that's not for me, like I need to sit in it. If you're the 10, you're the 10.
right,
But it's the same with walks. I knew that there was a particular walk that I would want to do again, which we did together. And I couldn't imagine doing that walk, but I knew enough as a therapist that if I avoided that walk long
yeah,
enough, that would become more challenging. It would feel more overwhelming eventually when I did. I would be overwhelmed, and if I didn't understand that, my brain would then assume that meant I wasn't ready. But because I know that actually that's an understandable nervous system experience, that I set myself some goals that by the end of that week, I would, I would walk that 5 minutes.
right. Okay, so this is a little bit, I guess, under the normal, like, is this normal category? But I wanted to ask because, and I know we've talked about it, so maybe we've already said all this, but I'll ask you the question anyway, and if we have, we'll just move on. But we talked about guilt and all that. So a lot of pet parents feel their grief isn't taken seriously, by their family and
Yeah.
friends or people who don't get it. So how does that affect the grieving process for them? And does it affect it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, people who feel that people don't understand. I mean, that is the case. That lots of people do not understand. It's important, though, isn't it, for us to find our people. It's important to find groups like yours, Hindi, that a lot of people do not understand, and the reason why that then can affect or slow down the grieving process is because who do we talk to? If we don't have a community, if I'm feeling really, really overwhelmed, and people around me, even people that I'm really close to, friends and family who are usually really, really supportive, are not able to help me here. Even those that have also had pets, we can't assume that everybody who has had a pet will also
That's,
understand.
no, that's true. That's true.
They're probably more likely, but not always. So if you if you don't have that support, then your grief is like you're grieving, and then on top of that, it's a very lonely place.
Mm. Yes, it is. Oh, it
It's a
certainly
really
is.
low, it's a really lonely, it can be a really lonely place. It can be a really confusing place. It can also be a really shaming place. I think, like what I've mentioned before, which is, well, what is there something wrong with me? And if most people don't understand this, then there must be. So it's if you're experiencing that, then that's going to complicate the grief. It potentially makes that grief stay stuck, and it will add potentially other things in with it. So anxiety, depression, which are also likely common with any type of loss. But if you don't feel understood or validated, that is going to add into the mix.
We talked about how to handle, we're never really going to handle walking in the door for the first time, but in the
Mm,
first days and weeks, like in the really early days, are there any really easy things you can suggest to help people get through that shock and pain? Because that's like the initial front door is one thing, but then as you're, trying to get back into your routine, are there things you can recommend? And the next question, just to let you know, because maybe we should combine them, because the next thing I wanted to ask you about are, the rituals and,
yeah.
journaling or whatever, um, to help support healing. So I guess if we can, why don't we just combine those two? Because I think one will follow on from the other.
Okay. I think that in those initial, what did you like, few days or few
The
weeks or
early
those?
days, weeks, as you start to,
Mm-hmm.
I want to say get used to it, but probably not really, do you ever really get used to it? But just, because you're
Mm-hmm.
coming home, okay, you've walked in the door, you're
Mm-hmm.
sleeping in the house, but
Mm-hmm.
I can give a quick example. Like when my heart dog Red died,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was obsessed with her. I loved her so much. I think we were together for 9 years because I rescue seniors. So she was
Mm-hmm.
already older when I got her. And I loved her so much when I met her at the shelter. I was like, I always said I could not imagine life without her. I didn't think I would ever
Yeah.
survive that. And she was also on a lot of medication and like quite a schedule. My dogs are always on
Mm-hmm.
a schedule, but with the medication, and I was, you'd look at them and is she breathing? I was crazy like that. And I remember when I came home, and I still had my dog Jack, but I came home
Mm-hmm.
and I think it took about a good 2 weeks, and I would go outside and I would literally wander around my neighborhood. And I would say, so what do I do now? I mean, I had my group. I didn't have my YouTube channel at the time. I had my website. It's not like I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
busy, but this had nothing to do with busy. There was such a hole.
Mm.
I'm not exaggerating. I would walk around
No, no, I
aimlessly and
understand.
then I would bump into neighbors. I'm like, what do I do? I just didn't know what to do. Yes, of course, I still had Jack to take care of. Yes, I still had
Mm-hmm.
things going on in my life, but there was a gaping hole that I had I mean, when my dog, who I say was murdered from incompetence, I was in a bad, bad place. And I couldn't say her name for years and I couldn't stop crying. It was bad. And the one thing that helped me is I started a resource center, and I would go to the library every week and I would offer free advice for people that had dogs and cats. Trying to find something. I found lighting a candle, like a virtual one online through a pet loss support group, made a
Mm-hmm.
massive difference.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for sharing those examples, Cindy. I think I think we had the first thing that I mean, there's two parts to this. I think there's something about acknowledging, and I think this runs through the whole interview, which is acknowledging and validating that,
Yes.
of course, you didn't know what to do. Of course, it didn't make sense because, you know, to me, I think it feels like a part of us is missing too, because we're it's so many there's so many levels to the loss. There's the loss of the identity, there's the loss of the structure. So of course, like walking just wouldn't have felt the same, I would imagine. You know, even though, like you said, you had other dogs. It's like, but this pattern's different. What do I do with myself now? Like, this has been my routine for years. I don't know what to do. And just so like understanding that and like, that kind of makes sense. And, then and then we may be thinking about kind of practical things that may help, or that we can try. I would always take a step, like start with a step before that, which is to think about, you know, self-care first. And if you think about, like, I don't like using the word normal. It's interesting. I was thinking about this when preparing for this interview. With most of my clients that aren't coming for this type of like support, if a client says, "Yeah, I just want to be normal," I'm like, can we pause? Can we understand that? Can we be curious about that? But I find that I use it a lot because I am trying to like bang the drum a lot that this is normal. And so where I would apply this is, if you experienced a human loss and it was you had a really strong connection, there are things that you might find helpful to do in the weeks and months. We might have the ceremony, but we really need to focus first on like, you know, um, helping with our sleep and, food and, just getting a little bit of exercise. I wouldn't say to somebody who's lost their dad, the next day or within that week, have you thought about journaling? Or, these are things that can be helpful, but I think I'm going to normalize that actually in those first few days or weeks or months that it may be like, let's focus on like, can I help you like with your sleep hygiene? Can we, I know you're really, really struggling to eat right now. I know this walk feels really, really pointless, but can we maybe that by this time next week when I see you, if have like you do stand in the garden for 5 minutes and just embrace what that's like. And then in time, that's when we might be thinking about, are there things that might be really helpful? You said about the candle. I found for myself that, and maybe this is just a control thing, like developing my understanding about my dog's condition and then being able
Oh,
to support, or um researching or speaking to other people. That was something that really, really helped me. It was like gave me a sense of, I guess, of purpose and maybe control. I am always really careful that, because some people who I have seen as clients will say, well, I didn't do any of those things. I didn't want to light a candle or collect the ashes, and now I feel really bad about that, because does that mean that I didn't love them as much as this person did? So yeah, it's quite a big topic, isn't it? Because there's that the validation. Like, it's understandable that you feel lost, and because like I said, it's all about identity, responsibility. There's a lot of responsibility in caring, especially for senior dogs. Then there is like, am I able to kind of take care of myself in those first few weeks, months? Because that is really important. That is what will, it's not help get over, but it's what we need to do to take care of ourselves through that grieving process. Just those little goals around that. And then, is there something that that I want to do. Like, I have, this necklace that I always wear, which has got Bruce's ashes in. I have
Oh,
a cup
yes,
which
I
is
had one of those. Yeah.
faded here. But then you have to be really careful. And I'm going to admit this, I have tattoos everywhere. I love tattoos, and I always get a tattoo, um, especially when and I'm sure some therapists would love to analyze that as well. And I got a tattoo. I knew I was going to get a tattoo when I lost Bruce. Now, I don't regret getting it because it's important, but I think that because rushed that a little bit, I probably wouldn't have got it from the place that it's not somewhere that I would have usually gone. So, and I think it's because I probably went on some website and was like, what can I do? And I was like, bought everything, and you know, um, because it felt like that was my way of remembering or showing
Right.
love, when actually I think really what I needed to do in that moment, or is to kind of slow down. I think, I wouldn't probably be getting a tattoo of my mum the next day. She's alive, but
That
if that makes
is,
sense.
it's so interesting. I'll tell you why I find this fascinating because I put the question about rituals way
Mm,
before, like the question about self-compassion is at the bottom. It's actually the
mm,
last question. And the
oh,
way you're saying it, it really should come first because I feel like, I mean, when my first cat died, I had no experience with this and I couldn't go to work. I stayed in bed crying for 3 days. Like I literally could not
yeah,
get out of
that's
bed.
fine. Yeah.
And to me, self-compassion, maybe that says a lot about me, but we're not going to analyze me at the moment. That's like way down the list. For me, my gut reaction, and that's why I asked about this ritual because, when I write about it or people talk about it in the group, it's like, yeah, journal and plant a tree and
Yeah.
paving stone. And I thought, God, I'm so tired of the same old, same old. Is there not like another idea that I could suggest? So I was curious what you had to say. And yet, not that you can't do it also. It's not like you can't come
You
home and
can.
light a candle, but it's interesting how self-compassion is more important. And I put it at the bottom.
And that makes sense, doesn't it? Because I think what's really great now, and this is and I want to make sure that the point, I'm not making the point that these things aren't useful
No,
or
no, of course
helpful.
not. But how much
They
self-compassion will help you?
absolutely, I think it's, the 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 more we talk about this, the more we raise awareness and education. Like, I've got like so many books, and like you, Hindi, I was like, is there something more that is there another idea? And of course, there will be lots of different ideas, you know, but they're generally the kind of same kind of things, aren't there?
Yeah,
So, like the jewelry, or plant a tree, or get a cushion with, or make
yeah,
one with their
yeah.
favorite toys, which is lovely. Get a tattoo, but obviously that's a permanent thing. Uh, um, all of those things. Scatter the ashes, keep the ashes. Visit their favorite beach. I went to a place a few months ago which was lovely on holiday, and I was walking along the beach, and there was this photograph of this dog with a box, and it had like tennis balls in, and it said, please take one, our dog used to love this beach,
Oh, that's
please
so
take one. And
cute.
like, yeah, and then
Oh,
replace it with something else. That was
yeah, that's
really
cute.
lovely. That was
Very
really lovely.
nice.
And then there's other things where I think it's maybe less obvious. So, I found that, like I said, researching or reading books, or um even like poetry or drawing, all of those things are really, really can be really, really helpful. I just always want to make sure that people don't feel like if they don't do that, because that's what I'm starting to observe as well, is that if you think, well, that's not how I it's not how I operate. I don't feel the need to do that.
Right.
That's okay. It doesn't mean we don't have to attach something to that. And I've found, and maybe this is just maybe I'm more aware of it. I don't know, but a few interactions just with friends that they over explain why they didn't do that. And I think
Oh,
that's because there's a lot more awareness, and that's okay. But we have to start with, like, if you need to stay in bed for 3 or 4 days, we look at something a bit later that we're like, when do we know that we actually might need to kind of get some more support with that? But that's what you would do potentially with another type of loss. And that's why I'm saying that let's normalize it in that way. You know, if you can't eat properly for a few days, but we can focus on, can we work towards maybe like having one meal? Or I know socializing is really, really, really hard. You don't have to get back out there. I wonder if we can look at, being more passive in that. What about a text message? Just so there's some connection,
right.
or even joining these groups, but not being vocal, going in them and out them when it feels like, it feels like that's useful, but also it's okay if it feels too difficult. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work for you. It may be that for the last half an hour, it was quite intense and we need to move away from that. Watching TV mindlessly, like that's it doesn't mean that, I think I just like laid on the sofa and just watched like
Yeah,
just mindless
yeah,
things, because that was my goal for the day.
yeah. Also, not everyone can do that. This is something that just
Yeah.
popped into my head now and would have been more appropriate when we were talking about guilt, but I just wanted to bring it up. I remember that I was after one of my dogs died, or was it my cat? I can't remember that, but I remember that I was like, this happens like after a person dies. If you're
Hmm.
smiling or you're actually laughing, it's like, oh, is that too soon? I know it doesn't mean I love them less, but I'm enjoying myself. I probably should have mentioned that during the guilt section, but because we talk about normalize, like it's okay, stay in bed as long as you don't, there's a difference. I'm staying in
Yeah.
bed, I don't want to sink into a hole. And then I'm also
Mm,
enjoying myself. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there. But the next thing I wanted to ask about was what do you do with your dog's stuff? And I know that's like a big thing. And again, like I see people in my group, is it too soon? I'm giving all the beds away. Like I cannot go into this house. I have to get rid of everything. And I say, you know, if someone else, let's say, packs it up for them, but keeps it because you can't handle seeing it and then you get rid of everything because you're just so grief stricken and then you regret I can't, and these are irreversible decisions. So
yes. Like getting the
what do
tattoo.
people do? To me, it's like if
Yeah.
you really can't stand to look at, there is no deadline. Like I said, my dog's leash was hanging on the hook for years and her pill schedule was hanging. It doesn't matter. I didn't want to get rid of it, and that's okay. Other things, medications I gave to some, I don't know, some rescue that ships overseas to, countries where they have nothing.
Mhm.
Certain things you can, but it's up to you to decide, and there's no pressure of when to do it. But I think the biggest mistake, and I know, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say, is for people to just be so hysterical when they see something, a toy, that they just want to
Yeah,
throw it all in the garbage.
absolutely. I think that it is really, really hard, isn't it? Because for some people, that is so overwhelming and painful. And when we feel pain, it's our natural response to get help for that pain, get rid of that pain, fix that pain. And so it would make sense to do that. But what we generally say in my work is that, if you can, and I know this is really, really difficult, it is best to not make any concrete
Yes.
decisions whilst you are grieving, especially in that first period, or even, when we're depressed. The general rule is, if you can, like, try not to make any big long-term
Yeah.
decisions in that moment, unless the the thing that we're not making a decision about is making the depression worse, but is to know that in that moment that it is your emotional brain that will be activated more in that moment. And so it's not that it's shutting down your thinking brain, your rational brain, but it's not going to be online as much as your emotional brain. It's not going to be online as much as your, you know, activation in your body at the moment in time. And that will be what is kind of steering the I've got to do this right now.
Right.
A bit like, I've got to get this tattoo right now because my emotional brain was in charge at that moment in time. So if knowing that, it doesn't necessarily help, but it can, in terms of taking the pain away, but it can help make sense if we can make sense and normalize. Again, it's that normalizing, like, I know I'm going to feel flooded. I know that I'm, you know, going to feel really distressed. It's understandable that I feel distressed because X, Y, and Z. I know that when we are distressed, our emotional brain is most likely to be making the decisions. That's not necessarily a bad thing in some occasions, but I think I need to pause so that I can get both them online
Right.
talking to each other.
Right.
How do I do that? I'm not sure yet, but I so what do I do in that moment? Okay, I need to ask somebody to help me or put them in a different room, or, like, say, ask somebody to somebody that you trust. Can I store them at your house until I can make more of a rational
Yeah.
decision? And you may still come to the same conclusion, but at least it will be more informed. Because, like you say, once you make that decision, that's it.
And then you'll have more
And
guilt
then
to
you
deal with.
and then you can live with regret, and then you can live
Yeah.
with,
You don't need, you have enough, so you
yeah,
don't need to add
yeah,
to it.
absolutely, absolutely.
Now, how can a person, and maybe it wouldn't be the person, maybe it would be someone close to them, how can they tell when the grief they're experiencing is normal? We keep using the word normal, but I think it's just
Yes,
the word people understand. Do
yeah.
you know what I mean? So how do we know, or how will someone close to them know that this is kind of like what we could expect to see from you and how you can expect to feel versus, because I know grief is not linear. They always had those
Yeah,
5 stages, and I know those five
yeah,
stages have been debunked. And I know there's someone else had 7 stages, and you go from the first to the second to
yeah,
the fifth to the first and all that.
yeah.
So how do we know? This is my long-winded way of how do we
Mm,
know when this is kind of, the typical grieving process, and we can expect to come to like a place of where you're feeling more like yourself, or this is not getting better, or it's getting worse. I think you need some professional help. And I don't even mean just like, I'm not sure if I even mean like that would be the time for a support group, because a support group would always be helpful, but maybe I do. That would be up to you to give me your
mm,
thoughts. But, when should they, or we can do it like, when should they seek a support group, and when should they seek someone like you, perhaps a therapist?
mm. So it's interesting. So in my experience, that I find that a lot of clients contacted me a lot quicker
Yes, you said that to me when we spoke
with
originally.
where because maybe within like the first day or the second day, or definitely within the first week, which is interesting because if I was to compare that with the loss of a human loss, it's not usually the case. And I think that all fits in with, there's this kind of understanding with human loss. Like, I'm probably a person, may really, really struggle or spend like 2 weeks in bed, and a family member or friend might be concerned about that, but because society kind of understands that grief, they may pay attention to it, but also kind of feel like okay about it to a point because it makes sense to them, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Whereas with usually it's the opposite when somebody is contacting about pet bereavement or the loss of their dog. It's like, I just don't understand why I feel this way. So, but when that may, so usually that can be like quite quick, like sometimes I will see people for like 1 session or 2 sessions. I'll tell them about all these different things that they can do or support groups. Did you know about this? And they kind of dip in and out. But when it may be like, is this something that maybe is stuck or potentially is, I'm worried about this person, is that, you know, it kind of depends. It can be when they're like they're really ruminating, or like if they, if they're that you'd expect to feel like depressed, but there's a difference between being depressed and having depression.
Right,
Like I would
right.
feel like, I feel low, but like, or if somebody has a history of, then it doesn't mean that they are, going to dip into that, but it may be that there's a higher risk. If, if that guilt, usually I think is when that guilt is not moving or shifting, or that self-compassion is just, there's no self-compassion, because that is when I often see it tipping into something else, which is shame. So, or, rumination, or I'm a bad person, I don't deserve to feel any better because, I didn't do this, or I killed my dog, or, if that isn't easing and it's actually potentially developing, and then along with that comes other kind of symptoms, then that's when you might be suggesting, actually, I'm wondering if, or I'm concerned, or I think if also, you know, death is traumatic, you know, and in it's is kind of again normal to in the beginning to maybe struggle with like trauma type symptoms, so like flashbacks and nightmares and anxiety and panic. But over time, if that isn't moving, or then it could suggest that that is that trauma is stuck, and that's maybe when it might be useful to get some support.
It's also, this is the kind of loss where we usually are the ones making the decision. And
Mm,
I've seen it in my group where people have said, I'm not ready to kill my dog, or I killed my dog. And we all try and explain to them, you're
yeah,
not killing your whatever. But, a human loss, obviously still different, human, but this is the only time where we are making that decision. I mean, we're not really making it's like you have no choice, you have to do it. because you don't want your dog to suffer, but we're giving the okay. And that, of course, guilt and all that we've already talked about. So how, that also would play a factor in moving on and learning to cope rather than, okay, now I really need to see a therapist because this is not healthy for me now. It's just, I'm
It's when
stuck.
it's yeah, it's stuck, isn't it? So, and it is stuck potentially and also updating. So it's kind of a bit like what I said earlier about that pattern matching. So memory, is, if you think about it, in like when if you most of us at some point have experienced some kind of trauma. Obviously, I've just said then any loss is traumatic. It doesn't mean that you will be traumatized for the rest of your life, but it is in itself. That distorts the way that how we think, and our brain may not make sense of things properly. So I've seen on occasions where people are updating, like, over the weeks, well, this happened, or I am thinking, did it? It seems like a version of that,
Mm,
because that guilt is so insidious, it's so
yeah.
horrible. It's like looking for extra information. It's gonna like try and find every bit of thing that you over the last. So say if you're lucky that your dog lives to a particular age, if you're stuck in that grief, it's going to, or in that guilt, it's going to look back on the entire life probably and go, oh, you remember that time and that time
Mm,
and that time. And the more that updates, and if you think about it, that as, I guess, that wire in your brain, that
yeah.
muscle is just going to keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And so that when it comes to trying to be compassionate, or when people are try to be like, hey, do like, I hear this, but you seem to be, you did the best you could. They can't hear that, because actually this muscle is so big now. It's trying to compete with one that doesn't even exist, or is tiny. And that is when we might be thinking, actually, this is, it'd be useful to kind of speak to somebody who can help me through that, as well as everything else, like listening to, reading books, or finding things on YouTube about it, like why am I really struggling, going, attending support groups, being passive. I often will say to people when they're the clients that come to me like that, I will like say to them, you're not going to accept some of the things that I'm going to say.
We don't
Yeah.
want to hear
Yeah.
it. We don't
Well,
want to hear it.
you're not gonna accept, like, I'm not going to try to convince you. I won't, I won't, I won't agree, but I accept that where you are right now is that this is feels like impossible. Yeah, it feels impossible. Can we agree that we just know that this is something that this, is happening, without having to accept that that's right or wrong at this moment in time,
Interesting.
you know? So I might say to, I guess it's more about, I suppose I focus then more on like education and the grieving brain. Is like, I, you've come to me, you've been really, really struggling with this really makes sense. You've not had anybody to speak to, you've not had the support that you need. When you have tried to reach out, you've been met with this. Some was really, really unpleasant, some was well intended, but not really very helpful. And you've told me that you also are somebody who often beats yourself up. You've given me previous examples in other areas of your life. It makes sense. You know, you've told me about this relationship you loved so deeply. Therefore, you will feel responsible so deeply. And over this time, this has meant this has really, really, really built up. And, we, it just kind of like, again, normalizing
Yeah.
that is what's happened or what is happening.
I think you're about to use that word again because
I
this is
will.
my last question. It's pretty much I think we all know the answer because you've been so thorough and you've given such great explanations all along the way, but it's like a
I've,
summary. So if someone watching this has just lost their pet, and to be honest, it doesn't even
mm,
have to be recent. It could be, it could
oh
be
gosh,
ages
yeah.
ago and we're still dealing. Um, if they're feeling completely overwhelmed, and I know the answer, but you're going to say it, what's the one thing you want them to hear right now, other than this whole entire
Well, yeah.
interview?
Well, what would you say, Hindi?
That that what you're feeling is normal.
It's
And the
normal,
most
and
and more important, and you're not alone.
it's normal. There is nothing wrong with you. We do not need to pathologize. We do
Right.
not
And you're
need
not
to go
alone.
like you're not alone. Like, you know, and find your people.
Yeah.
Find your people. That's what I would say. It's hard enough. This is hard enough, but your grieving will be so much harder if you do this in isolation. If you do this feeling shame because you don't understand it or people don't understand it, it will be so much harder. That is when you are likely to have to come and see me
Right.
because of those. Yeah. You
Right.
don't need to come and see
Absolutely.
me because the more we get this out there, the more that we can get support sooner.
I hope that people will watch this before they experience loss. I don't know if I would have done. I know that I knew absolutely nothing the first time I had to say goodbye. I knew nothing. I walked into that office. It was one of those, her blood tests were terrible. The
Mm,
right thing to do was to say, I mean, I'm not going to go into it now, but I had no idea. I got a form put in front of me with the words, and he was the nicest vet, with the words euthanasia on the top, and I thought I was going to be sick. And thank goodness I said, yes, I want her back, because I could have easily, in that horror moment, who knows what I could have answered. Do you know what I mean? So I really believe that the more we are, listen, we're never going to be prepared. Anytime you say
no.
goodbye, you could have said it goodbye 20 times before. It doesn't get any easier, but you know what to expect. And even with something like this, I'm going to keep circulating a lot in my group. I really hope people
Mm,
watch it before they're at that point, because even if it doesn't make them feel any less depressed and
no,
devastated, which it won't, but
no.
at least they will go into it knowing that they are not alone and that this is exactly what people experience. And I think that will make a big difference, in my opinion.
Hindi, if you feel like after this you want to do another one or like a video, I would love to do
Sure.
one on what you've just said there because like you just said, like you can't fully prepare, but actually, as horrendous as my experience was before, which led me to see my therapist, as hard as that was, there were some moments in there that really helped me. So when the time came, if I didn't have that information,
Yeah.
it would have been a lot worse. It would have been a lot worse because of things that I knew to ask for and to research before. And some people think that's, what do you mean? But my therapist helped by sharing her experience. And then I was like, oh, okay. Oh, that's going to be really important. I didn't spend a lot of time in that, but I touched it. And I'm so glad that I did. I'm so glad that I did. So I think it's if we can, if we have that, I guess we don't always have that luxury,
No.
but we don't always have that luxury with that pet. But if we bring animals into our lives again, which we usually do, it may be that that is helpful information for the future.
We will.
So
So anticipatory grief,
yes, yes.
fantastic. It's a date. We will let everyone know when that will happen. I know it's such a big topic with so many
It's
different parts to
massive.
it that, yeah, that would be amazing. So thank you so much for your
You're welcome.
time, for saying yes, for having this chat. I'm very grateful. And I know that this will help so many people. So I'm excited to start sharing it. And people will just have to
Okay.
grab a drink and a snack.
Yes. Oh gosh, it's like a film.
It's long, but it's worth
It's
listening
long
to.
because it's important, isn't
It's
it?
so
And
important. And the
so,
more we get that message out there, the more sympathy and empathy other people will have, which will help those of us with pets grieve
yeah.
better.
And if I could just say one thing
Yeah,
actually just on that now before we go,
yeah.
actually the approach that I've been trying to highlight throughout this is that extreme. So you can also approach this. If you watch this video and you think, oh my gosh, it's like an hour and a half. If you think about that scale, you might like to think, oh, 0 to
There's
10. Oh, that's
timestamps.
still
I'm putting
just
timestamps on there. You can scroll
just
through.
just scroll or like watch 15 minutes and then because that might be all we can tolerate at that
Yeah.
time, and that is okay.
There's chapter
That's
markers
okay.
with
Oh,
titles.
fair
So,
enough.
some
Fair
maybe
enough.
one part will be more relevant. So
Okay.
anyway, thank you
Oh,
again. And
thank you,
thank you all of
Hindi.
you for watching. And we'll see you in the next video. Have a wonderful
Okay.
day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.